Hello, good morning, and welcome everyone to When Tomorrow Comes. My name's Dan Jastico. I'm iCini's Director of Futures, and welcome to our regular look at the world of planning and development. We are lucky enough to be joined by an external speaker from Vita Living, James Rook. How are you doing, James?
Yep, doing very well, thank you. Looking forward to being part of it.
Welcome. We've also got Ashley Cook. How are you doing?
Hi Dan, yeah, I'm good, thanks.
And Sarah Coburn. How are you, Sarah?
I'm well, thanks, Dan. Yeah, good.
Good. So as we enter as we're sort of entering a second lockdown now, we're sort of a bit more focused on living inside and being a bit more introspective. But we kind of forget about the benefits of city centre living and the vibrancy and bustle and all the good stuff that comes from living in a city centre. So Sarah's penned an email this week which reflects on that. So Sarah, do you want to give us just a sort of high-level summary of that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Dan. So yeah, as you've mentioned, this week's article is about city centre living, and it's really just bringing to attention the many benefits there are of city centre residential development, not just in providing obviously much needed homes, but also wider benefits for the economy. So obviously, city centre living has the attraction for a skilled workforce. It can help promote vibrancy in the city centre, has knock-on benefits for the surrounding businesses. So there's that aspect of it. Also, sustainability-wise, with an increased population in centres, we've got potentially a reduced demand on travel. So people may be more willing to walk, cycle, or use public transport to access workplaces and other facilities that they're looking to get access to. So yeah, so it draws on all the benefits that there are, but at the same time acknowledges that it's not always easy to get planning permission for city centre development. So a few things that we could discuss there as well.
Okay, thank you. James, what's Vita's take on city centre living? Clearly your products are focused on that sort of side of things, but why?
Well, I think that's a good point, and it was nice to see in the article that Manchester gets a mention as a city that is really promoting city centre living. As a business, we are developing and opening 1,700 PRS units, and we just gained planning permission last month for 1,500 co-living beds, all city centre living. And for us as a business, we see that as the future. We have a number of student developments, and we've seen that since there's been an increase in students living in the city centre, it makes a natural transition for them when they finish their studies to want to continue with the city centre lifestyle, which for them is even more enjoyable now that they've got a wage supporting their eating and drinking habits.
Thank you. Ashley, from a planning perspective, what do you see as kind of the benefits of city centre living?
Yeah, well, I think Sarah's sort of summarised quite a few of them, but I think one of the key things is just that access to local facilities, shops, restaurants, bars and everything, having them on your doorstep, being able to just walk or cycle to them is a huge benefit. I think that as someone personally who has lived in a suburban Scottish town, most of my sort of teenage and sort of young life, I love the fact that I now live in the city, and I don't think I would change that. I love the fact that I can just hop on a bus and within 10 minutes I am, at a local sort of high street where I can shop, where I can meet friends, and I think that that's a huge benefit. I do think that Sarah did touch on some of the sort of constraints, and from a planning perspective, it can be very difficult developing in city centres. They have a lot of historic urban grain. They're already lots of character. There's height issues, and buildings are in close proximity to many other buildings, making actually getting new development there extremely challenging. And there's lots of balances that need to be sort of struck, and that's where the sort of planning balance comes into focus. It's interesting, James, that you spoke about sort of having lots of recent successes. It would be interesting to hear actually what some of the key challenges you faced on those sites, because it's probably something that here at iCini in our sort of planning team we have to deal with a lot, just in terms of the really challenging constraints that you face on city centre locations.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point to make. I think you touched upon the obvious ones, which are high scale and massing. I think my view in doing what we do, there is always a solution to that, either being a smaller building or a larger building or a slightly different design. So I think you can always get around that in the planning process. I think for us, the biggest challenge is the planning system that is currently there is only set up to guide development for one type of residential living, which is their sort of the owner occupied flats and apartments. How particularly young people want to live in city centres is a flexible way of living, not too concerned about ownership in their younger years and not too concerned about space, but want to experience all the benefits of the city centre on a smaller salary. And I think it's the planning system's inability to react quickly to changes in how people want to live and consume space, I think is the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome. And I think with councils, I think we can get there with communication with officers. I think for me, the biggest challenge is communication politically. Normally on the planning committee, is made up of a number of members who are not of the demographic that live within the city centre or have a desire to. So for them to understand these different types of desires from the younger generations, it doesn't compute. And I think that is the biggest challenge that ultimately sometimes cannot be overcome.
Is it, Sarah, is that true in Glasgow as well as sort of other English cities?
Yeah, I think in Glasgow, as you say, it's a similar situation here as well. There's kind of maybe a bit of lack of education on what housing demands there are. You know, it's not only demand for suburban houses. You know, people have different aspirations, and yeah, city centre living is very much something which people are looking for. So yeah, as James has said, I think there needs to be a level of education both at officer level and communities and also elected members as well.
Yeah, I do wonder from just, it was interesting what you said about the members, and I think that that's something that we've definitely experienced on a few schemes that we've worked on as well. And I wonder whether actually potential, not so much solution to it, but something that could help is getting sort of younger generations more involved in the planning process. You know, I think about how powerful it would be if you had someone, you know, of the demographic that's looking, you know, that fits your product, to stand up at a planning committee and speak in support of your scheme and to talk about how much it could benefit them to be able to afford a space like that in the city centre. Because you're right, you know, it's not the members' fault that they are the demographic that they are. That's just the situation that exists. And I wouldn't expect for me to be able to relate to the type of living they want to do, and for them really to be able to relate to the type of living that sort of a younger person would be able to do. So I wonder if that is something that might be able to help members as well as sort of help us in achieving city centre living.
Maybe take on a night out or something like that and show them what they're missing.
I think in all seriousness, though, the benefits, you know, of city centre living have to be given a bit more weight in the planning decision process. You know, as we've discussed here, the economic benefits, the sustainability benefits, they need to be, you know, fully acknowledged. So.
Completely,
James,
and I think
do you get a lot of support from local businesses for sort of bringing sort of young people with disposable incomes into city centres?
yes, it's a short answer, and particularly when you bring them in the quantum that we do, the socio-economic benefits that you can draw out in the planning process from the building of two buildings next to each other of almost 1,500 beds of all people on graduate or young person salaries is pretty significant in terms of what they do. But I think the planning process, doesn't necessarily take into consideration people's wages as much as it should, and what is deemed to be an acceptable wage or amount of your wage to spend on rent. And that ultimately will shape the residential product that they can hope to achieve. You don't want people to be living in the city centre and then not being able to enjoy it and spend their money at local businesses. And I think that is something that is often missed out. It should be buildings are designed for their end occupier, and end occupiers should be a target demographic that fall within a certain wage band.
Do you find that starts having an impact on things like viability and affordable housing contributions and things like that?
Yeah, it does. Affordable housing will always be tested through the channels that it needs to be tested through. But I think the temptation for us is, particularly for our co-living product, we knew the exact demographic that we wanted it to be. And when there were viability challenges, the temptation is, or the expectation from the people that reviewed our viability assessment, was to push the rents because they deemed that our rents were too low. We actually set a proportion of our rents to be at an acceptable salary, acceptable rent for the starting graduate salary, which in Manchester is £21,000 a year. And we were very adamant not to move away from that, because if we were moved away from it, you're then not hitting the demographic that you need to.
Yeah.
But when we had our viability assessment reviewed, they couldn't comprehend that you're not just pushing the rents to what is the city centre normal, but the city centre normal is excluding the very people that we want to entice into the city centre.
It's brilliant. That's a really good model. And it'd be remiss of me to go a vlog without mentioning the dreaded C word. How are you finding that COVID's impacting the market at the moment?
At the moment, we haven't seen an impact that I think people would have expected. I think for a lot of people, it's been a very turbulent time, but for a significant number of people, it's just been a slight adapted way of working, and they've continued to work throughout or in peaks and troughs. So we haven't seen the impact that has been expected, and I think that's a testament to the amount of construction that you still see underway in all the cities around the UK. I think at the start it was all doom and gloom for the construction industry, and it seems like they've carried on regardless, and there's funding there to keep them going, which is just positive for all city centres.
It is positive, isn't it? I mean, my thought on it is that once the sort of impact of the, fingers crossed, the vaccine kind of filters through, then that those markets and that sort of passion for city centre living will really kind of re-emerge, and everyone will kind of be back into the city centres, hopefully engaging, sort of eating, drinking, and enjoying themselves once more.
Yeah.
Okay. That's probably all we've got time for today. I'd like to thank our panelists, James, Sarah, and Ashley. Thank you all very much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you all again soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yes.